I will actually get into the meat of it now. This is what you came for. But I do think that that information is really useful. I said at the beginning of class, but I think we had some people join late. Install these 3 packages if you do not already have them. They tend to be bigger packages, so you're going to need to install those. So as I said, I put this code in chunks, and I am going to actually get rid of this now that we understand, and I'm going to run it chunk by chunk for us. So I'm going to run this first chunk. All that it's doing is loading the data and loading the packages. So I'll run that chunk. This is just an R Markdown thing that makes a default way of showing your information. So this is a default. Echo equals true refers to showing my output as a default. So I will run current chunk. So here we go. The first example I gave, I wanted to give an example of something that we would use the aggregate function for. So in this case, I'm going to take a look at our data here. So heroin opioid or hair opioid. I wanted to show you guys what this data looks like. So each row in this case is a state value, a single state in a given year. And then it has the overdose rate. It then has the drug we're referring to. I also have a state abbreviation here if we need those, which we will down the line. And then it has the region that this state is a part of. So that's one of the data sets we're going to be using. And that's the one that we're going to be using first. So in this case, I wanted to find I wanted to subset this to only opioids in this case, because we're trying to make something that's simpler to look at. So this first part, what it does is takes our overdose rate for opioids, and in our by function, it finds the average overdose rate by region and by year. So we are finding the mean, and there, I believe, are some missing values. So you will want to put na.rm equals true. So one thing that makes aggregate a little less useful or difficult to use versus the tidyr is it doesn't give useful column names. So this here we go. State prescribing. There we go. Okay. So it puts your group 1, your second group 2, and X as your value. That's not going to be really useful for us when we're graphing. So you have to change the column names here to region, year, and mean overdose rate. So that's what we did in this case. So now if you go in, our data, each row is a region for a given year, and it has the average overdose rate. So we're going to change those column names back. So this is the basic thing for ggplot. Everything is going to start with something that looks like this. So we have our ggplot function. Every graph you have will have this part. So first we put data equals, and we put our data set that we're using. Then we have a comma. And then this always is the next thing. So we have, it's called an aesthetic. So we use this aesthetic function, and within it, we put basically what we want to include in our graph. So the X is going to be the horizontal axis, which will be year in this case. Our Y will be the mean overdose rate, and our color, this is a line graph that I'm creating, so we would use color, not fill, will be the region. So, and then, and you'll see this one as I go down. So when I make a ggplot graph, I recommend building it one piece at a time. So this is the first 2 pieces that you would use, and I'll show you kind of what I mean. But when you add customizations to your graph, you add them with a plus sign. So say I wanted to make a customization after geom_line, I would add another plus sign and then put the function down here. So that is what we do, and we basically build one piece off of another. If you try to do too much at once, if you make an error, it's going to be a lot harder to debug. So if you get an error and you build it one step at a time, you know that the line that you just added is, if an error shows up, is where you have your error. Versus if you do 10 lines, then if you have an error, it might be more difficult to actually locate. So in this case, this is always the second. So you tell it basically what you want to create. In this case, it's a geom_line. So I'm going to run this entire chunk. And it's going to show me down here what it created. So this is the default. It has all of the default settings. So I never use this gray background. I don't think I've ever used it once. I don't like it. Our lines are too thin. They're hard to read. Our labels are our variable names, not something that's actually like legible for a stakeholder. There's no labels, and this is gray down here. That's hard to read. So that's everything that is wrong with the defaults in general. So those are the things that I want to change going forward. So, but this in general, this is what the first thing that's created. And you'll see what I mean by building on top of one another. So the next thing I did two very small things. So you'll see that I created multiple graphs. So I did an individual chunk and added only a few elements each time, because this is how I recommend actually building it. This is how I would build it normally. So in this case, we still have these values here. I did do this one thing. I added 2 elements here, and every time I add an element, I tell you what it is up here. So in this case, I reordered the lines, and then I added titles, labels, set figure size, and increased the width of the lines. So down here, you'll see this. I wanted to put Northeast first, Midwest second, South third, and West as my last value in my legend, because we're kind of moving from east to west in that case, and it's a little easier to understand. So all I did, this is an example of when you would use that factor function. This is what you would do. I'm using the same labels, just reordered them from northwest to west here. So it was the order makes sense in that case. I added size equals 1 because I want the lines to, as we talked about, these lines are not thick enough. So I want to add and make these lines thicker. So that's the second thing I did. Third thing I did was add labels. There are a couple different ways to use labels. ggtitle, GG is another way to do that. I prefer the labs function, because you can create all of your labels in one function, versus for ggtitle, you have to do a single line for the title, a single line for the X value, a single line for the Y value. So you can do whatever you want here, but this is the way I prefer. They both do the exact same thing. So I gave some informative titles here. In this case, did average state overdose rate per 100,000 persons. So these values that I'm showing are the overdose rate per 100 person. They are also age adjusted. So that it's beyond the scope to go into what that means. But that if you're looking up and you want to know exactly what they mean, that's what they mean. And it says by region and year. You'll see I have this here. I'm actually going to take this out to show you why I have it in here. So the next thing will show a little bit of a different graph, but I will add it back in and show you the difference. So the color here So you always match this value to what's up here. So if this was a fill color, you would put fill equals down here. So this is our legend line. And down here is our X value. So X our horizontal axis is going to be year. And then our y-axis will be mean state overdose rate per 100,000 people. I'm going to rerun this real quick so I can show you what that \n actually did. All right, so here is our graph. In general, I don't like the fact that all of this is kind of spilling over the graph. So one thing that I'm going to do later is center this. But when I center it, the A is going to be all the way flushed up next to the end, and it's not going to look very good. So one thing that you can do in order, and you would maybe even want to do that here, and I think I might actually do that. So you can split this onto 2 lines, and I'm going to actually do that for both. So this \n will not actually show up in your graph, but it will break it into 2 lines. I'm going to do the same here because I think it will be easier for stakeholders to read. So now I'm going to show you the difference. Now, our mean overdose rate per 100,000 people is on 2 lines, and our average state overdose rate per 100,000 persons by region and year are now on 2 lines as well. You can do this for legend items, by the way. So you would create a factor variable with that /n in it, and it would, if you had a long label in your legend, it would do that here as well. And you can do that for any of the labels. Okay, I'm going to stop and ask for questions real quick. See if there's anybody who has any questions about either the standard structure or how we add on new elements or anything that you have. Please go ahead and ask.
So Kelsey, I have a question on the x-axis. I guess it would be the minor scale bars, like
these.
Yeah.
Minor. Yes.
Yeah. So it seemed like removing those would, if there's a way to compress the chart on the x-axis by removing those, it might become more impactful because you got this.
Yes, agreed.
But I just don't know how to do that.
So there's 2 different ways to do that actually. So I'm going to go into my little cheat sheet here. That's something I probably should have put in here. The first way to do that, you would want to Google, there's actually a function for removing minor lines. You might not have to do that. The better way probably would be under useful customizations. It's called a theme on here, and I'm going to show you how to use this in just a second. So theme minimal, so this is not going to have any background. So there's absolutely no grid lines in this case. So theme light will have light gray. So this will also change the number of grid lines that you have. So there's going to be themes that will have just those major grid lines and some of them that have all of them. So in general, I did use theme minimal, which does have these, but they're a lot lighter. So you could, I'm 100% sure that there's a theme that would get rid of these lines. But I am going to go. So say there's something like that Michael just brought up and you don't know how to do it. This will happen using ggplot. So remove minor grid lines ggplot. See, I've already Googled this at some point because I wanted to do that. So remove grid and background from plot. So you would go in here. Theme black and white will get rid of the background. You can change the background color. So we would go through these. So he is changing this to the panel background element blank. So that looks like it did exactly what you showed. So we're going to go over the theme in more detail, but there's probably a bunch of different ways to do it, but he's showing you here one way, which is here, because you see there's minor grid lines up here and there's not down here. So if you didn't know how to do something, that's exactly what I do every time that I don't know what to do. I just Google with some easily understood keywords, and then we can find that. And I can actually add that in later on when we get to the theme part, just so you can see exactly what I would do if that were the case. As of now, this is what we have. We have created this. In the next chunk, I want to show you how you would add a plot theme. So getting rid of this ugly gray background and changing the line colors. So this is always the default colors that are used in R the first time you graph something, and I'm not a huge fan of them. I generally usually change them. So in order to add a plot theme, it's very easy. I talked about this earlier. So you add, in this case, I'm using theme minimal. I'm coming back. Will there be in-person attendance? Yes, it will be a panel. I will, just like I'm streaming now, I will be streaming. Also, I will be recording as I usually do. It looks like Michael is back. Michael, can you give a synopsis of what you do since you're going to be one of the panelists?
Yeah, so I focus primarily on building out analytics solutions, any from enterprise applications, anything from an ERP to a CRM system. If you're familiar with that, it's all usually relational databases or software as a service cloud implementations. Getting that into a data warehouse and doing the integrations, the data pipelines, the transformations, designing the metadata, and then the visualizations that go on top of it, along with trying to enhance business processes along the way, vis-a-vis KPIs and things that you'd be able to measure in R using some statistical models. So trying to move the business from a spreadsheet way of doing business, talking about the past, to talking about today, and then moving into talking about the future, all with data.
Yes. And you use SQL very frequently, correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of SQL to do to get the data into the relational database management systems. It's good. It's old technology, but it's good. It's been around 40 years, so it's been tuned extensively, and you don't have to deal with the intricacies of cursor-based or procedural operations. You can do everything in a row-wise operation, which makes things really, really fast.
Yes. My boss, for instance, our default is SQL. If it can be done in SQL, she wants it to be done in SQL because it's very fast. So thank you, Michael. So it will be Chris Lewis, myself, and Michael will be talking as of now. Okay, so I'm going to get back to this real quick. We, in this case, are going to add the theme minimal. And in this case, the theme minimal looks like this. So it takes away our gray background. It makes our lines a lot lighter. If we go into here, I show a couple of the major ones that you see. And I explain what they are, but you can Google this and it will give you a lot more information about this. There's a lot more than just these 6 individual themes. There's quite a few. So all you do is put the plus sign here, because remember, you connect our individual items in our graphs with plus signs always. And then the last thing I did was scale color brewer. It, again, keep in mind, So there are different scale color brewer. They're similar. So you'll see here that I used color here, and that it's coming back to, again, to this color versus fill thing. So one of the things that I had trouble with when I was learning this is that when you have a color group here, you always have to use color brewer. If you have fill like you would in a bar graph, you have to use the fill brewer. So one of the really useful websites that I use all the time is Cookbook for R's color manual. You can see this up here. But it has a lot of different aspects on color here. It goes over how to set colors manually, and it also goes over the color brewer. Here it gives you an idea of the different things that you can use. So it allows you to change the hue. So that is how transparent they are and how much white is involved. It shows you the different, this is what I'm talking about right now. So I'm using set 1, but there's also, if you leave it, just turn it on, this will be your default. And this is called spectral. There's a lot more than just these 3. And there's a lot you can do with color. You can set them manually. These are the manual values. I believe later on I show you how to do it manually in one of my graphs. So I recommend using that website. I can, I'll really quick post that on the chat because it's something I use on a daily basis. Color website. All right, so that should be very useful to you guys. So that's all that I did here. So this adds the theme, this adds the color. So I am going to run that. Oh, I always forget. Okay, something's going on. Run. All right, see if this fixes it. Turning on our shiny, I think, caused a little bit of a problem. Changed my settings. There we go. Now we're good. Okay, I believe it's running now, so I can go ahead and show. So we added our theme minimal. So now the gray background is gone. That's the one. We also changed the color scheme. So it's no longer this. Instead, it's this. This is an example where I would not use a gradient. So light green, middle green, dark green here, because it would be really difficult to tell the difference between the lines. For something like this, where they run together, I recommend using things that are very disparate or very different one from another. So you can see those different lines, and stakeholders can distinguish Midwest, for instance, from Northeast very easily when we're looking at these lines. So those are the different changes we made there. So as I said, I'm adding on little by little, and this is how I would make it in real life. So, and I'm going to go over more than one example because this is complex, and I think you will catch more the more that I show. All right. So the next thing is, so when you see up here, I don't like the sizes of this font. This is too small. This is gray, and it's tiny. This is too small. This might be okay, but I'd probably want that to be a little bigger as well. So all of the text formatting goes into a theme statement. So everything that has to do with formatting your text or the position of your text or anything having to do with that will go here. So the first thing that I'm showing here is plot.title. So this plot title, I wanted to make it size 14. HJust is the horizontal adjustment. So up here, you're seeing that it's not centered. In this case, I want this to be a centered title. So in order to do that, you do 0.5, and that puts it in the middle. You can also do a left, it's automatically a left flush to the left side. You can flush it to the right side. I believe that's 1. But here is 0.5, and I also want to make it bold because it's the title and I want it to be easier to read. In general, I try to go down from that size for our other elements. And this is something that you have to do in trial and error. There's probably, hopefully, a reference looking at how big your graph is and how big each text would be, but I've never looked it up. And so I generally do a trial and error approach. If I put 12 in here and if 12 isn't big enough, I change it to 14, rerun, and see if that's better. So another thing about ggplot that I would recommend. So this is complex and there's a lot to it. However, all line graphs are going to be pretty similar to one another, the structure at least. So in a lot of cases, I make the line graph once. I'll copy and paste this code to say the bottom of my code. I will change the data within it. I will change the variables within it, change the name, and then I will adjust the titles and make any other minor adjustments I need to make. However, I, in general, this from scratch once or twice. Recommend when you're doing it and learning to do it separate, but you never really have to completely build this from scratch after you make one line graph. So I do recommend that. So here, I continue through this. So this is axis title. You're going to see here that there's a specific structure and it works this way every time. So our plot title here, we put equals so we can set that plot title. The first thing that we put is element underscore text. If we are adjusting our text, we always put this to tell them that we're adjusting text, because you can adjust other things like legends and positioning of things in this theme statement. So if you're changing text, that's always going to be what comes after it. And then however you want to change the text would go here. One thing that I want to show, I will actually show what this looks like first. And there's a way to take out elements, which I will show in a minute. So this will be our axis titles, and it looks just the same as what we did for the plot title. This is our axis text, which is these values here. And we have our legend title. We can set that. The size, and I centered here again. You can center in any of these. Sometimes centering is the default, sometimes it's not. And then we have our legend text, which would be these values. I set those as 13. And I also moved our legend to the bottom of our graph. So you'll see what that means in a second. Another thing that I added here, so when you have line graphs here and you have distinct time points, sometimes it's better to add, say for 2015, it's good to add what that value was in 2015. So this is, after this, it's going to be add dots to basically where our data points are. So I added, and it would be the same thing. This is how you would add dots to a scatter plot as well. I added that geom point, which is always dots on your graph. And then I changed the size to 1 as well to make them a little bigger than the default. So this is our result here. So you'll see that, as I said, the plot title is now centered, it's bolded, and it's a lot larger. Our mean overdose rate, it's also larger. And then our axis text here is larger, and our axis title. Also now, instead of having, you'll see up here, our legend is here, and it's taking up a lot of space, and there's a lot of white space that's unused. So now it's on the bottom, and there's a lot of not a lot of white space. Okay, so there's a couple things that I'm going to show you here. I'll show you to change the color of the text in a minute. But say, for instance, I would want to take off or remove text. Say for some reason we didn't want our axis labels here. Sometimes, depending on what the graph is, the legend and the labels are redundant and they gave the same information. That's not the case here, but it happens. So say I wanted to get rid of my axis text. All I would have to do is change this to element blank. Remove our size here. And rerun. So that will, if I rerun current chunk, now we have no axis labels here. So that gets rid of those if for some reason you would want to. Another thing, I'm going to undo those changes. So another thing that I use pretty frequently, sometimes you may want the x-axis text to be bigger than the y-axis text. So you can actually set those separately. So axis text.y would be our horizontal. Say we wanted to make axis text.x. I did make a typo up here. So say we wanted to set that to be, for some reason, size equals 14 instead of 13. If we rerun that, now our axis labels are back, and our axis text on Y is now bigger than on X. So that's how you would do that to adjust. You can also do that for the axis title as well. So I will get rid of that just because it was just a one-off showing you what to do. So that is what this would look like. I'm going to rerun this chunk. So now, as we said, we have our points where our data labels are, and we have adjusted our text size. All right. So the next thing, we're going to call this finished. Oh, actually, one other thing that we would want to do, I had mentioned this. I do not like the gray on the axis text, so I'm going to change to color equals black. So that's one thing I did miss here. So now our text color is not gray anymore, it's black. So that's the final output that we have. I did add this from the last time I taught this class. So we want to export the file. You can have this here and you can export using these buttons. I believe it's that one. You can export it that way. And I don't usually do that though. So because it doesn't give you a lot of the options to change. So ggSave is what I generally like to use. So this allows you change the file name in if you put file name equals, and then you have the file name. If you have your working directory set, you do not need this path part. But in order to change your working directory with R Markdown, I would have to do it in each individual code chunk separately, because it doesn't change it and use the right working directory otherwise. So in this case, I used, just put the path in. To specify the file type, all you do is put .jpeg or .png, which I'll show later here, and that changes the file type. I believe you can do PDF as well. So you put the plot here and the object that you want to export. If you see here, our graph is set to this object. So our plot equals that. You can set the width and the height very easily. So in this case, I went with 7 inches and 4.5 inches. This is something that takes a lot of trial and error as well, just to kind of get what you want and what is best for your graph. You set what the units are. I generally use inches, but you can use centimeters and others as well. And then the DPI sets the quality. If you wanted to make a huge poster, you would want to set this quality a lot higher. If you're emailing it, you would want to set it to a low value. 300 seems to be the best mix between file size and file quality, in my opinion. I generally use 300. So if I run this, now my working directory is here, class 5 results. our date modified. So it's 11:59 and this is just outputted. We open it, there's our graph, and it's outputted exactly where we told it to go.